You know, despite how popular tank brawlers are, I rarely ever use them. Of course, I've made several videos on them in the past and some are fun to play, but most of the time I just stick to damage dealers and assassins. However, I think that's about to change because recently I've been using Trunk, and supposedly the worst tank brawler in the game, and I've been having a lot of fun and success using them. So in this video I'm going to go over why I think Trunk is a good brawler, not just in regular multiplayer, but also in ranked, because apparently he's not good in that either. Now, a lot of players, especially on Reddit, have said that the main issues with Trunk are his attack and loadout, which combined make him a not so good tank brawler. So starting off with his attack, while I do agree it could be better in terms of DPS, for a brawler like him, I think it's perfectly fine. I mean, there are plenty of brawlers who have a relatively slow attack speed such as BB, and while Trunks may not be as fast as Jackie, it's still good enough to do some serious damage. I know many players are going to consider using him on Heist for this reason, and yeah, he does about as good as you might expect. Granted, you also want to do the maximum amount of damage that you can do, and for that you might want to consider using their For the Queen gadget, which simply deploys ants in a larger area, and given that it has a 7-second cooldown, makes it worth using. Now for star power, I'm just going to be real and say their new Insect Overlord star power is better than Colony Scouts. While the 15% damage decrease may not sound like a whole lot, I do think it's better when combined with his gadget, and I certainly think it's more practical than being able to see brawlers hiding by using ants. However, there is of course his other controversial gadget, Worker Ants, which allows him to absorb damage into health for 2 seconds. The reason I say controversial is because many players are split between this being good or just the worst gadget for any brawler. I personally think it's a good gadget, though I do understand why most would say otherwise, and that's mainly for 2 reasons, with one being that it only lasts for 2 seconds, which isn't a whole lot, and the other is the 16-second cooldown, which is definitely long for what this gadget does. While I would like to see some type of buff to this gadget in the future, it's still very much usable as it is in quite a lot of modes. Aside from solo showdown, he does surprisingly well on gem grab, albeit with some limitations. I will admit I did make a few mistakes in my first match, mainly because I got too cocky, but it did help understand the strengths and weaknesses that Trunk can have going into other modes. Speaking of other modes, now we move on to ranked, starting off with Brawl Ball. Now, it's been a fat minute since I played Brawl Ball, in case you couldn't tell, but I was generally surprised how good Trunk could be on offense and defense. Given how much health they have, they can make for a really good distraction, especially if you have the Worker Ants gadget. Of course, damage can vary, especially with how chaotic things can get, but thankfully it's relatively easy to unlock their super if you want to deal more damage. Moving on to the second ranked match, happens to be another good one, which is Hot Zone. I think many players are going to be familiar with this map, and I think it's possibly one of the best maps to use Trunk on. So, it's no secret that every map has its own meta when it comes to the best brawlers to use, and in this case you will see a lot of players using Bo, Barry, Edgar, or even Tick because they are generally the best when it comes to controlling the zone. Though despite that, they each have their own weaknesses, and I think Trunk is really good at exploiting them. For example, Edgar and Bo cannot attack beyond cover, while Trunk along with other similar brawlers can. And even if Trunk cannot damage a brawler, you can easily force them to go one direction, allowing your teammates to finish them off. Now, would this always work? I wouldn't bet on it, but it certainly gives you an advantage that you can exploit. This match was a close call, and if I were to do anything different, I would say upgrading Trunk to the max before playing might be the smarter route. So those were my thoughts on Trunk, and in my opinion, they're a lot better than what most players are making them out to be. Of course, they won't be good on every mode, which is why I didn't bother using them on every mode, but I'd say their position right now is good enough. Anyways, have a good day.